I don't know if anybody's paying attention. I think you're paying attention. If you listen to this, you're probably paying attention. And paying attention to what a fucking idiot I am. But no, really, it seems like with the way the internet's been working lately, in the last few years, right, we've all been getting dumber. We're supposed to have the entire world of human knowledge at our fingertips, but for some reason, somehow, through the social media algorithms or whatever you want to blame it on. Maybe it's just human nature to act viscerally to everything that they come across and to be smartass and snarky. It just seems like we're really kind of devolving into thinking in quack speak. If you're not familiar with quack speak, that's the language that the INSOC in George Orwell's 1984, the English socialists, were trying to implement this new language where they had eliminated words from the English language to reduce people's ability to think. They could not even think of the words that would um, be able to express thoughts capable of contradicting the party narrative. And they dubbed it as quack speak because it was to sound quick and quacking like a duck by limiting everything possible to as few syllables as possible. I think George Carlin did a really good job breaking this down, talking about the opposite, how we like to make things longer, how we went from, shell shock to PTSD, post traumatic stress disorder. And so he had a whole long bit on it. If you haven't seen that, I really suggest looking it up because George Carlin is freaking brilliant. Was brilliant. I hope he's up there with Harambe and the Infinite Bamboo Forest. Um, but yeah, so I kind of stepped back for a little bit. I got kind of busy with work, so I haven't been casting in a while, and just kind of trying to get things on the personal side of this going a little bit better. And of course, I went like 30 something years without ever doing a podcast. And you guys got what, 15 episodes and how fast? So, don't be too greedy. Settle down, okay? I mean, I love every one of y'all. I mean, figurative, appropriately, inappropriately maybe, you don't know, right? You know what I'm doing over here because I don't have a camera. Actually, I tried doing some recording a while back with the camera. I recorded for 40 minutes to find out that none of the audio recorded. I have no idea. I am a complete incompetent buffoon when it comes to this technology here. I really should be spending more time researching how to properly record and economically because I haven't invested much money into this podcast. You might be able to tell by my high quality audio that it's only top of the line, the most state of the art, sophisticated gizmos that money can buy on Amazon. But all that said, right? I noticed something today in the science news that was really cool because you might have guessed by now, I'm pretty fascinated with wildlife and also, the implications and complications that come with being around wildlife, especially if you live in a rural country, which I do not. I live here in the U.S., in glorious Tejas. But I've traveled quite a bit around the world, and I've been on every continent except for Australia and Africa, and of course Antarctica. Everyone's like, "Oh, you haven't been to Antarctica?" Well, no fucking buddy has been to Antarctica, unless you're like a researcher or military or something. I think it's where they keep all the aliens and giants. That's why they don't let anybody there. There's just giant aliens and UFOs all stored in a tropical paradise that only the wealthiest 1% of all humankind can go and visit. Kind of like that movie Ex Machina or Ex Machina, whatever the hell, however the hell you say it, right? Where the guy goes to the island, and it's like this private island, and he's flying in a helicopter, and he's like, "Well, when do we get to the island?" He said, "We've been flying over it for hours now." That's what's going on down there. Like Jeff Bezos probably owns fucking Antarctica, and there's like a Disneyland and an ark just for all the elites once the coronavirus goes to full, kill capacity after they give us all the vaccine. And the vaccine makes us all super susceptible to it, and all of us, you know, pee on polar areas, get killed off, and then they get to have their that's where they're gonna stay. That's where they're gonna stay until all the vaccine kicks off. Well, that was rude. I didn't mute my phone. Let me shut that off so I don't have to annoy y'all with all this anymore. Because I don't. I know you guys don't want to talk to that telemarketer any more than I want to talk to him. Although I think maybe one day it could be fun if we did a prank call together with the telemarketers. Sometimes it's nice. You ask them to marry you, and you just propose to them just out of the blue. Oh, hi, 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 Joe, with the new program for looking. I don't, I can't speak today. Hi, Joe, trying to sell me an extended vehicle warranty. You know what goes really good with extended vehicle warranties? Some good old-fashioned monogamy. Let's get married, you and me, right now. Look, I signed the contract. I'll go ahead and extend my car warranty by a few years, and you can get in on this too by taking my hand in holy matrimony. Oh, I don't care if you're not gay. I'm a woman now. I'm a woman, and we're getting married, and that's it. It's fine. Look, your dad's already paid the dowry. It's a get over here. Look, you've already got my phone number and my address, so get your ass over here and carry me across the fucking threshold. I'm ready for my honeymoon, Joe. Get over here, right? So maybe one day we could do that together. It'd be fun. As soon as I learn how to patch in a phone call to one of these podcasts, that's gonna happen. I'm gonna start calling the telemarketers. I'm gonna start asking them if they want to buy a warranty on their warranty. It's like when you're young and rude and you're walking down the street and some poor downtrodden homeless person, you can see the look on their eye and they're about to ask you for some money, and you just look real sad and you hit them with, "Hey buddy, you got a quarter?" And they look at you confused and you just walk on by. I know it's not nice, but you don't always have to be nice to everybody. I mean, you probably should, and I'm probably a horrible person for saying that. But you're probably horrible people too for listening to me. I'm just kidding. You're all wonderful people, and we're all going to make the world better by being incredibly honest with each other. Unless, of course, that honesty includes how fat and ugly I am, because then we're not friends. I can't stand that kind of negativity. So, back to the wildlife thing, right? Um, I was reading an article that was really cool, right? Talk about living in rural areas. Uh, One of the most neglected diseases on the earth, and it's just now recognized by the World Health Organization. I know I've criticized them before, but hey, look, we all have room to grow. I can grow too. But so that disease is snake bites. Okay, so in some of the sub-Saharan Africa, about 270,000 people get bit every year, resulting in about 55,000 cases of PTSD, 14,000 something amputations, and about 12,000 deaths. And this is just sub-Saharan Africa. I mean, snakes really fuck up a lot of people. And then, if you get into like India and Asia, it's like 2 million people get bit and need medical treatment. And it's like 80,000 to 138,000 people die. They don't even know how many people die because some of these places are so rural, and you go looking around there and people are just missing limbs, and they just have deformities, missing big chunks of muscle from all the cytotoxic venoms. And cytotoxic dissolves muscle tissue. If you don't know that, you're not a snake person or a venom person. So anyhow, they're finally getting into this and starting to address it in the WHO as a neglected tropical disease, and finally getting some funding to start getting more anti-venom produced and other methods of treatment. So one of the things that a lot of people don't realize is that anti-venom is really the only recognized medically significant treatment. Okay, so all the other stuff isn't proven, and especially like the cutting and sucking, none of that stuff works. So you out there in your garden and you're here in Texas, you get bit by a copperhead, don't go taking Benadryl, don't go trying to cut it or suck the venom out. You're not going to do it. Like, right? Try sucking the water out of a freaking bag, out of a wet plastic bag, right? So like just put your face up to a sandwich bag full of water and try to suck the water out. Like, the bag collapses in on itself and it just sucks flat. Like, you can't pull it out. You can't pull enough of it out of there to make any sort of difference, because this stuff is super toxic, and there's not a whole lot in there, and it's deep in the tissue because, fangs and shit. It's like a hypodermic needle. You can't squeeze a shot back out of your arm. You're not going to squeeze the snake venom out. You're not going to cut it out. You're not going to flush it out. The only thing you can do is get your ass to the hospital, and get some blood work done, and some antivenom started going. Okay, so if you live in rural farm on India, that could be 5 or 6 hours before you get there. And you got shit like cobras over there that got packing neurotoxin and cytotoxins and and hemotoxins. Right? They got the three fingers of death, where they just hit you at all three angles, and like you got 4 or 5 hours of delay between getting to a regular hospital, much less getting flown to a hospital that has antivenom for these things. Is you're gonna die. Well, lots of people do die, or they end up going to one of these cheesy hospitals and they try a bunch of weird stuff. I like duck anuses. There was actually a really funny clinical not a clinical study, but it was in a research paper in a medical book where they were in India and they could not get antivenom, and they had no means. And I don't know the whole context of the story or why, but basically the local tribesmen, or what do they call it, the folk healer, recommended to the doctor, and the doctor was like, "Well, hey, you know what? Like, we're dying anyway. He's dying anyway. We're gonna try it." So they put chicken anuses on the snake bite. It described it as having been well cut. Actually, I don't know if I can read the whole thing to you because I don't know who owes the credits or who owns it, but it was an indigenous treatment for snake bite. The Indian Medical Gazette, and male age 36 stepped on a biocelic cobra some 3 inches in girth and bit him on the back of the leg about 4 inches above the heel at 9 p.m. one evening. I saw the patient 20 minutes later and discovered two puncture marks from the fangs of some 3/4 of an inch apart. In that situation, when first seen, the patient showed no symptoms except numbness of the part bitten. I have no antivenom available. I applied indigenous treatment, in which is much in vogue of Ratnagiri district. Sorry, I'm not very good with these Indian names. Anyhow, or pronunciations. The fang marks were well incised, and chicken after the other with their anuses well stretched were applied to the site of the bite. The first few chickens dropped down dead within a few minutes, and from the 42nd chicken onward, the patient stated that he could distinctly feel the aspiration actions of the chicken. Oh God, those poor chickens! Like I don't even want to know how they were stretched. I'm not gonna keep reading that. This is just too damn weird. But then, later it goes on to note, what does not appear to be certain, and the patient had received a lethal dose of venom. Fresh cobra venom has about the consistency of tracheal, and it is difficult to see how so viscous a substance could be extracted when it probably buried in the tissue at two spots about 1/3 of an inch or so away from the site of the punctures on the skin. It is known that cobra venom can be absorbed through the conjunctive, or at least it's supposed so, and works through the desiccated venom. It should always wear goggles when grinding into the solution. Right, so anyhow, basically, this guy probably had a dry bite, and that's why the chicken buttholes didn't save him. And I'm pretty sure it was a stretching of the chicken's anuses that killed them, and not, um, the venom being absorbed by these poor, horribly raped chickens. Medically raped, right? It's surgically raped chickens. It's all for the name of science, but this is sort of the thing that people deal with in these weird countries. I remember seeing one where they literally just taped a duck to the guy's leg. I think it was in Vietnam. In Vietnam, I didn't see this firsthand, right? But this was a study that I had read about where they just taped a fucking duck to the guy's leg, and like these people are desperate all over the world because they get bit and like they don't have a clue what to do. And you'll hear the same thing here in the U.S. about all these wild folk stories. I remember this. I was doing firefighting training, and there was this guy, and he's talking about he had gotten bit by one of those spiders that laid eggs in his arm. So he had to go to the dollar store and get him one of those cheap dollar store tasers. And I'm just thinking, like, you can buy a taser at the dollar store for $1? And goes on to describe how he used the taser to electrocute the spider eggs out of his arm, and the spiders come crawling out. I'm like, Jesus Christ, man, what? Someone's going to have to trust you in a burning fucking building? And can we just kick this guy out now? He's batshit crazy. He needs to eat way less mushrooms before coming to school. Um, but I have heard other people talk about you know believing that spiders lay eggs and skin, and all sorts of other wild wives' tales about venomous animals. Uh, so yeah. Anyhow, moving forward with my point is, so now that they're getting some WHO funding, they're actually looking at some of these lesser spoken of forms of treatment. When I say lesser spoken of, I'm not talking about duck anuses. Um, I'm actually talking about some of these drugs that are used, pardon me, to combat heavy metal poisonings. I don't know the name of them because I don't really, I haven't really looked into it any, but I'm actually just reading an article from Science News. It's a really good one. I suggest you look it up if you're really curious about looking further. It was published today at sciencenews.org, and they're looking at using metals, drugs that combat metal poisoning in people who have consume too much metal, like lead and stuff like that. And in the at least the mouse test, they call them PLA2 inhibitors, right? And so they the mice actually survived. So the ones without without the drug, all died. Apparently, within less than 4 hours from being injected with snake venom. Like, man, I'm so glad I'm not a laboratory mouse. These things die such horrible ways. But they actually went and they used puff adder venom, beta-carotens, and some actual fertilants, Bothrops asper. If you're familiar with those terms, beta-carotens is a puff adder from South America and responsible for the most deaths in all of Africa from snakebite, and the fertilance is probably responsible for a large number of the snakebite deaths and amputations in South America. They're pretty nasty customers, especially if you get bit by them. The Bothrops asper is mostly a hemotoxic venom, so it really likes to screw up people's blood and kidneys, and the puff adder causes a lot of amputations when it doesn't cause kidney failure and other damage. But okay, so then the other ones that's really cool are just polymers. People are looking at using plastics, right? Right, plastic nanoparticles to create artificial antibodies, literally synthetic antibodies to inject into people for the sake of combating snake envenomation. And they had actually started practicing with this with bee envenomation in mice. And like, man, that's really screwed up because bee venom hurts a lot. It's a neurotoxin. It's made to excite things and cause a lot of pain, right? That's why nobody likes getting stung by a bee unless you're like a nasty, nasty freak and into that sort of thing. And if you are, bees are in danger. Leave them the fuck alone, you freak, okay? Find some other way to get your rocks off. Just knock it off, man. We need the bees. Honey. Honey to the people. Got to get the pollen out there, right? They're not your winged, buzzy little six-legged sex toys. Okay. That said, um, so they're looking at that, the polymers, and they were using the bee venom to inject mice and cause them this horrible, horrible death. But hey, you know what? After a little while of agony, these polymers would kick in and save the mouse from so he could be injected with horrible, painful venom another day. Hey, all right, we're recycling mice now. I don't know. I don't know. Do the mice get a reprieve? I never even thought about that. Is it like a death sentence? If you survive the execution, you're considered a free man. I don't know if that actually happens. I remember hearing that in a movie once. It's like, oh yeah, if you survive being hung, you walk away free. But then I always hear them on TV say, well, hung by the neck until you're dead. So like, I don't think you get away like that. If the rope breaks, you walk free. I don't know. If you survive the bee venom and the polymers save your mouse ass, are you free? Do you go to like some sort of lab rat retirement home, or do they just euthanize you and throw you in the trash? It's like you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. I have no idea. I really probably should look into that. And then one of the other ones that was really cool is they're actually looking at doing like they do for insulin. And I read about this. They were doing it with trying to do it with cobra venom, and they'd had a couple good candidate bacterias where they genetically engineer them to produce a toxin that is similar to cobra venom, so that way they don't have to milk cobras and get the venom out of them that way, which is dangerous for the milker, right? Because they get bit all the time, and they get allergies. But then they can also produce it, in large vats by producing bacteria that produces the same thing. Um, but then there was another route where they were going to produce the antibodies directly from bacteria, the way that they produce insulin now. Is they genetically engineer bacteria to produce insulin. I don't really know how it all works. I haven't looked into it, but yeah. Anyhow, so it's pretty cool stuff happening out there in that part of the science world. And then it's really cool is they just now have realized that if you give birds a bunch of drugs, it'll change the way they sing. Like they're giving the University of Wisconsin has been giving birds fentanyl and then recording the way they sing. Like, god damn, who comes up with this shit? And I wonder, like, is this like a government funded study? Are we funding getting birds hopped up on fentanyl so they can sing jazz? I mean, that is pretty wild. Researchers gave a dose of fentanyl to birds to see what type of song they sing. They found birds given the opioid began to sing like free-form jazz immediately. The team linked to the joy birds get from singing the team linked the joy birds get from singing to being in a flock with other birds. So these are sad birds. These birds are all sad and alone. They ain't got nobody. They're depressed. So they're gonna dose them up with fentanyl, some opioids. Man, it sounds like exactly what happens with people, right? Like they're substituting all their social interactions and otherwise wholesome positive mood enforcing type things that occur naturally with da, 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 exogenous drugs, right? So yeah, big surprise there. But this is still kind of cool, right? They found that when birds sing for pleasure rather than to mark out territory or to find a mate, the bird singing is gregarious and sound like jazz. So okay, but see, I'm kind of unclear. I guess apparently the fentanyl just substitutes for their natural biological things. So like if you got a parrot and he seems a little lonely, give that motherfucker some heroin. Polly doesn't want a cracker. He wants some goddamn heroin. Okay, let's keep that in mind. Not a cracker, but heroin. Um, I guess that's why the pirates always kept those parrots around, right? They were doing heroin like crazy. At least I bet they were. I mean, they didn't have meth back then. They were smoking opium or something like that. I bet all the African pirates and that, all your ones that are stealing ships in Jakarta, you can bet those guys are all fucked up. That was one of the oldest tricks of warlords forever was, getting young boys hooked on drugs so that way they get them to go out and kill like crazy. And that's definitely one of those things that happens probably way too often. But going back toward the birds here, right? And not just the heroin addicted parrots, but let's see. We've shown that opiates cause singing behavior. Ritter said. I mean, I wonder what the big long-term goal of this was. What is the biological connection between humans and these starlings? And like, who just sat around one day and said, you know what this bird needs? He needs some fucking fentanyl. I'm sure that there's some brainiac out there who's going to make a bunch of really profound connections out of this. Probably more like, hey, you know what? I have deduced that we can get government funding for a bunch of harebrained fucking experiments. And we spend the rest on heroin and, lose it. I don't know. I have no idea. Like, I'm just making that up as I go. You might know that. So another thing that's going on right now is apparently all of California is on fire and your SUV is to blame. I don't know why Canadian forests aren't on fire to the same degree. Maybe the Canadians are a whole lot better about policing up their forests, or maybe they had forest fires the year before. That's probably a little bit more logical, but I'm just going to go on and say that your SUV is actually the one to blame, and that is why California is burning to the ground and is this red hellscape that cannot be escaped, unless of course you have money, but most people who live in California don't have any money because everything's so expensive. And the only people who live there that have money have it well, there's lots of people that live in California that have lots of money, right? Like, let's not tap dance around that. But they're all smart and they're leaving. And they're going to go someplace else and fuck that place up. But it's totally not their fault. It was just that, everybody else didn't get on board enough with their policies that got them to this point. And, you know, it's also all the other states who didn't adopt their policies too and accept, that their SUVs were destroying everyone and destroying the world, right? And causing this all to burn up. And of course, your white privilege is also setting the forests on fire. I know that's kind of a leap to say that it's your white privilege, but no, it totally is. It's your lily white skin that set these forests on fire, and I'm sure it is somewhere within critical race theory that will explain your how your whiteness set the forest on fire. But man, I don't really know what to make of this. It's just it happens all the damn time out there. I mean, forests burn. Like it's literally part of the natural cycle of it. And now, of course, if you're burning down more, if you're clearing more trees for more apartments and more condos and more mansions, then there's going to be less to grow back, and you're going to have less and less that can actually burn each other. So like so every year you're going to have more percentage of the forest that's on fire because your overall total areas of forest is smaller, right? So you can say, well, last year we only had, 3% of the forest was on fire, and this year we're at almost 4%. Yeah, well, you reduce the size of the forest by fucking 7%. And those aren't hard numbers. I'm not pulling those numbers from anywhere. So like, don't quote me on that and say that those are. I'm being hyperbolic at the moment. But so let's see. Each of the past 6 years were at least 1.8 to 3.6 degrees warmer than the historical average. Historical average is like 100 years, so we can, that's how we measure. Since we've been recording history of the weather, we've only gone back 100 years in the almanac. Now, of course, we can pull up a bunch of other data from, ice core samples and other places that will give us an idea, assuming that CO2 levels strictly dictate the actual temperature and extrapolate from that exactly what we believe it to be, but that is, that leaves plenty of room for question as far as the accuracy of it, because, we can barely predict a fucking hurricane. We can barely predict the weather from week to week if it's going to rain, and you're going to tell me we can predict accurately to a tenth of a degree what the weather was like a million years ago, what the weather was like 1,000 years ago. I mean, I find that rather dubious of a claim. Now, don't get me wrong, I know that a lot of people put a lot of effort into coming up with all of this, and that, they know way more about it than I do, but that still doesn't mean that there's not room for skepticism, and maybe a lot of it's been, explained away. But the last one I watched was some of the NOAA scientists, and it's on YouTube, and you can look it up. They were talking about, they were doing a press conference. I watched the whole hour and a half of it. It was at the White House, and it was probably 2-3 years old. But anyhow, the press kept trying to get the two scientists to say, hey, well, what do you think we should do in the future about global warming if the sea ice is melting in the Arctic Circle? And trying to, get them to get some sort of soundbite. The guy's like, I don't know, open a new shipping route. You save a lot of time shipping stuff to Russia. Shipping stuff to Asia, you just cut across the top and not around the side. It'd be a lot faster. And these were the scientists that actually did the research and had completely gone through the entire explanation of how a reduced length in plankton grow time, right, caused by lower sea temperatures by the melting ice, reduce the amount of plankton that could grow in a certain amount of time, reduce the amount of sea mackerel through, the shrimp or whatever that feed on the plankton, and that would result in less and less seals in that area, and therefore less larger predators, and so on and so forth, right? Like the whole food chain, and like like that's something to be concerned about, like a food chain collapsing. No doubt, I'm not trying to minimize that, but they were just trying to get him on the hook to say that it was absolute doom and gloom for humanity, and the guys were like, well, I'm not going to say that. That's they didn't say that response specifically. They said, well, just open a new shipping route, do something. They did not seem like they were incredibly concerned. They were really just speaking from a scientific perspective. This is what we observed, and this is what we predict will happen to these things that we are specialists in. Not are all the forests going to catch fire? I mean, and you got to get kind of burned out on this because, terrorism apparently at some point was linked to global warming, and like at that point, you just kind of whoa, pump the brakes. What the fucking train are we on here? This is the Bustaloonie town. Like terrorism is the global warming is the cause for terrorism. Excuse the shit out of me. No, 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 no. There's nothing about you know higher sea levels that causes me to jump in a plane and crash it into a fucking building. Okay? Like nobody does that. That's not what causes terrorism. What causes terrorism is insane ideologies. Global warming. No, I'm just kidding. It's not an insane ideology. But maybe people take it like a religion. Everything's a religion now. It's so weird. People get so entrenched into an idea. As soon as something's promoted, it becomes blasphemous to critique it, to criticize it. Unless, of course, it's an actual religion. Unless that religion is Islam, you can't critique that one. Which I say that, laughingly, because there are plenty of people on YouTube that do critique it a bit and criticize it rather aggressively. And just like Christianity in the past, it was definitely had its faults. You definitely want to say, hey, you guys did some horrible shit. But again, that moved on, and now like we're facing another thing where a newer one is the Islamic terrorism, but like that's died down a lot. And so like now the big thing in the news is white nationalist terrorism or white supremacist terrorism, far right wing extremist terrorism, and I don't see those guys burning the cities. I don't see those guys mailing rice and letters to political officials. I don't see that happening. There was there have been a couple. I think there's been at least one of the mass shooters. Two of them, maybe a handful of them that were actual right-wing extremists. You can't get past the old window licker who shot up that church in Mississippi. I believe it was Mississippi. I don't even want to say his name, but it's the top of a house. Because fuck that guy. Um, y'all know who I'm talking about. But anyhow, I've just been really, really kind of frustrated with the low resolution thinking that everybody's just kind of getting swept into. Like everybody is just so reduced to thinking. They're walking memes. Like they're literally walking memes. Everyone are memes. I know I'm always gonna have this debate. Is it quinoa? Is it a meme? Is it whatever. Pronunciations are fun. English is fun. This podcast has been fun, and I think I'm going to wrap it up right there because I've rambled on enough. I've hit over my 30-minute mark, and I hope you guys are enjoying the cooler weather here in Texas in the wet, soggy land, and brace yourselves for Tropical Storm Beta or Rook. It's the beta of all tropical storms. Really, let me fuck his girlfriend. Bye, y'all.